This is part 2 of lesson 1. We're going to be going into further details about some of the basic concepts, including the meaning of logistics and supply chain management and the differences between them. But we're also going to cover a couple of other very important concepts that will be used throughout the course that have to do with using logistics and supply chain management for a competitive advantage. So it's important that you get these terms down. You might already be familiar with these terms, but it's important that you understand them in the context we're using them. Logistics is the management of the flow and storage of inventory such that total cost is minimized and customer service targets are achieved. In logistics, these costs include transportation costs, inventory holding costs, warehousing costs, material handling costs, procurement costs, labor costs, etc. Customer service targets include such things as the percentage of time in stock, percentage of demand fulfilled, and percentage of items in stock and others. Now, there are trade-offs among many of these costs and among these costs and service targets. That is, if a company spends more on transportation in order to achieve shorter transit times, they can spend less money on inventory, as we'll see later in the course. Or if they invest more money in inventory, they can have higher service levels. As a result of all of these interactions and trade-offs, it's very important to manage total costs in logistics. Historically and even today, many companies don't do this. There tends to be a focus on one or another cost at a given period of time. Supply chain management is really a broader concept than logistics. Supply chain management is the management of the integration of business processes between functions in a firm and with suppliers and customers. You can imagine the supply chain concept helps to implement logistics. Remember, logistics is about managing the total costs and the customer service and the interactions and trade-offs among them. Supply chain management sort of offers a way to do that and even more than that, because you've got to have integrated business processes if you're going to manage trade-offs. A business process is a set of activities and information flows. That's all it is. Examples of business processes, common ones, include the new item introduction process, the order fulfillment process, the customer relationship management process, supplier relationship management process, the demand management process, which includes forecasting as a key part, customer service process, manufacturing flow management process, returns processes. Processes tend to be multifunctional. That is, they cut across functions. So if you look at something like the new item introduction process, it has to be designed in engineering, marketing has to be involved, finance has to be involved in financing it, etc., etc. It cuts across all of the functions. Professor Doug Lambert from The Ohio State University worked with companies and academics to identify a set of representative processes, and I just listed those. It's not an exhaustive list, and some companies probably don't have some of these processes. But traditionally, companies have focused on managing functions such as purchasing, manufacturing, finance, marketing, sales, R&D, etc., but not formally managing processes. Supply chain management is about managing these processes, which cut across the functions and interface with suppliers and customers. Economies of scale is a term you've heard before. I want to make sure you understand it in the context we're using it. It's very important to understand it because it will be used throughout the course. In the past, economies of scale was the primary means firms looked for efficiencies in logistics. Today there are many others, and we're going to talk about a few of those in a moment. But economies of scale exist when higher volumes reduce average cost. So suppose a company orders 10 pallets of bottled water, 14 ounces per bottle, and they cost about 5 cents per bottle. There are 2,000 bottles per pallet. Suppose they use a truckload carrier and it costs $1,000 for transportation. So the purchase cost is 5 cents per bottle, and there's 2,000 bottles per pallet, and there's 10 pallets, so that's $1,000 total. So the purchase cost plus the transportation cost is $2,000. $2,000 divided by 20,000 bottles is 10 cents per bottle. So although we're paying 5 cents per bottle, when we include transportation, it's 10 cents per bottle. Truckload rates are based on distance, not amount shipped. In this example, the company ordered 10 pallets, but a truckload has the capacity for about 20 pallets of bottled water. So suppose they ordered 20 pallets of bottled water. The transportation cost will be the same, $1,000, but the purchase cost will now be 5 cents per bottle times 2,000 bottles per pallet times 20 pallets, or $2,000. Hence, the purchase cost plus the transportation cost now is $3,000. So the total cost per bottle is $3,000 divided by 40,000 bottles, which is 8 cents per bottle. So you can see we've gone from 10 cents per bottle to 8 cents per bottle by increasing the amount we ordered, and that is economies of scale in transportation. In addition to economies of scale, and especially nowadays, there's more emphasis on finding efficiencies in logistics through process improvement and process redesign. So it's important for me to explain to you the difference between process improvement and process redesign, because again, those are two concepts we're going to be using throughout the course. But before we do that, a process is an ordered set of activities. Process improvement is concerned with increasing the speed of the process, reducing the cost of the process, or increasing the reliability of the process, etc., without changing the order of activities nor changing the activities per se in any fundamental way. Process redesign, on the other hand, is concerned with improving performance, but does so by changing the order of activities or fundamentally changing the activities themselves. You also need to know what an activity is. An activity has inputs, outputs, controls, and mechanisms. In a little bit, I'll give you an example. One part of the demand planning process for a supplier to retailers is order forecasting. That is, suppose you're a supplier of bottled water to a retailer, to retailers. Then you have to have an order forecast in order to know how much to have available to ship to the retailers. The actual ordering forecasting is an activity in the demand planning process. In this example, the input to the forecasting activity is data on previous order quantities and timing. So in order to come up with a forecast, we look at how much did we ship in the past. This is very common. The output is a forecast of the volume of orders next week, the week after, maybe even further out into the future. The mechanism might be just averaging the last 3 weeks of orders. That's a forecasting method. The control might be that the forecast can't be more than a certain quantity. So for example, maybe the forecast can't be more than 10 weeks of supply, which we'll talk about later. But that's what a control is. It's a limit or a constraint. With this process, if we change the forecasting method from averaging 3 weeks of orders to averaging 4 weeks of orders, and it makes an improvement in the forecast, then that's a process improvement. But it didn't fundamentally change the activity, and it certainly didn't change the order of activities. However, if we shift the responsibility of forecasting of orders to the retailer, so that the retailer provides the supplier with an order forecast, then that's an example of a process redesign. The outsourcing of logistics activities is an example of a process redesign. Outsourcing occurs when an activity or set of activities that a company manages is turned over to a third party to manage. For example, suppose a retailer has its own private fleet of trucks to manage transportation from its distribution centers to its stores, and that the retailer decides to turn over the management of this transportation to a third party. This would be an example of outsourcing, and the third party to the retailer would be called a 3PL, or third-party logistics provider. But you're going to hear this term 3PL throughout the course. Many of you have probably heard it before, but I wanted to be clear about what it was. In this example, outsourcing of transportation from the DCs to the stores could also include transfer of ownership of the trucks, but not necessarily. The actual contractual arrangements can actually be quite varied. Companies also sometimes outsource warehousing, manufacturing, data entry, payroll, and many, many other activities. Companies outsource for many reasons, including risk mitigation, cost reduction, asset reduction, performance improvement, etc. Some companies do not outsource because they do not believe the third party can perform better than they can, or they don't want to lose their ability to manage that activity. If you outsource something for too long, you eventually lose the ability to manage it. That is the end of part 2 of lesson 1.